So welcome to everybody who's here. It's so lovely to see all of you, and a warm, warm welcome. I just wanted to, in terms of the Burning Man, when I went and looked to see what the theme was, and the theme being the great unknown. And it just feels like a really wonderful connection to what I'm going to talk about, the great unknown, especially this particular verse which said, Marcel Proust quoted, "The real voyage at discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes." And I think in landing on that, that's exactly what we're wanting to, in trauma work, we're trying to bring a new attention, a new way of holding what we have already. And this shift and move between how do we work with that so that we're holding the same thing, but we're viewing it differently. We've processed it, we've linked to it, we've done something with it, and therefore it's settled in some form, and then we're able to renegotiate it. So the first thing I want to do today is to really remind everybody of their true nature, of the true nature that you were born to be, who you were born to be on this earth. What are the natural tendencies that you have? What are the natural passions and loves that you have that just sit at the center of you? And this way is almost like our blueprint that we don't want to ever lose, and we never can lose. So the work of trauma is reminding you of that person, that true nature that sits behind, and coming back to it. So whatever suffering or whatever might have transmuted it or somehow curtailed that true nature coming through, we're wanting to do the work to transmute, to change, to shift the trauma so that it goes alongside and opens up, but comes back to that place of homecoming, that place of your true nature. And in respect for that, I'd like to light a candle for all of your true natures, this deep sense of the importance of your true nature and who you are on this earth. And of course, we can remember it through how we are as children. A sense of what we loved as children often gives us a great indication of what that would be. So a reminder of the things you naturally incline towards. And then I want to light a candle too for our suffering, for the incredible amount of suffering and for the different types of suffering that we have, and some of it forming trauma. So lighting a candle for that as well, and just holding that in the space here together. And one of the things about trauma work is that it's around the atmosphere that we've got to do it in, because it's hard work. You know, you're picking up shards of glass in a way. So you're wanting to bring in an atmosphere of compassion. So the first attitude, the kind eye, the viewing yourself with that kind eye is really important. And I want to bring it in right at the beginning, the kind eye. That feels very important. Second of all, with things, when things come to curtail or block or in some way curtail and bring you to a smaller part of yourself, expression of yourself, we're wanting at that point to remember the parts that you lose in a trauma work. So it's almost like you've got to go and find that member, that part of you that's gone, and find it again and remember it, rehook it on, reconnect it. We're wanting that remembering of those parts, those members of you that go off and that get lost. So as I start my talk, it feels really important to bring all of those things in and to really just acknowledge your true nature and your suffering right there. Of course, there's a wide range of trauma, and we want to acknowledge all kinds. So we first want to acknowledge the individual trauma. What happened to you? What was the things that the incidents, the abuses, the accidents, what happened to you that can also be neglect and a lack of attunement in childhood. So the deeper developmental stuff we bring into that lack of attunement, we see as a trauma too, neglect or neglectful attunement. Then we think of the collective, and what is the collective trauma that is in the wider group? What are we all carrying? And in South Africa, where I'm speaking from, in Cape Town here, in very blustery and cold and wintry, in South Africa here, we've got a huge traumatic and collective trauma. Our collective trauma hasn't even begun to be processed from what happened in apartheid. The evidence of it is everywhere. The suffering is enormous in this country. So we want to acknowledge that, the level of suffering that's held by the collective. And then thirdly, we want to look at the intergenerational. And the intergenerational is from your genealogy, from your line, what's come through, what has happened in your line that maybe hasn't been integrated by some member, mother, father, grandparent, who couldn't integrate a behavior or an incident, and that it passes through in some form to you. So that's important to notice. What are those incidents? How does that work? And to start to do whatever work you need to do for your line going forward. I always think of it as it's almost like flailing electricity. It's like this agitation that's in you. And the work of trauma is to somehow process, and we'll talk about how, processing, linking, and then it's integrating it like that. And once it's got that integration, it loses some of its charge, and then it starts to settle. So that's where we're wanting that integration and that settling. And it becomes not forgotten, but it becomes part of an intricate part of you. But it gives you more galvanization to move forward. It doesn't deplete you in the way that it does normally. So we're wanting that, this ability for you to go forward. So my stories around trauma are of twofold. When I was in my early 20s, I worked during apartheid, so it was in one of the townships in Johannesburg. I was very interested in education because there was a very dumbed down education offered in those schools, and I wanted to work on reading schemes and how could we upgrade this education. So I started working in a literacy project that was putting books into schools and various educational facilities. I had to go through a checkpoint where army was being held with big guns, and they'd search me, and then I'd go into the township, and then the different schools, and there was lots of violence. In fact, the whole school system had closed down the year before. And so there was this, I didn't realize it then, but there was a lot of post-traumatic stress in the way people moved. I thought they were strangely absent, but they actually were in an almost freeze response. They were actually in a response from the trauma of that, of all the violence in their society, in their immediate society. Anyway, after working there for a few years, there was two things that happened. One, somebody jumped into my car and tried to steal my bag. And then we had this big tussle over my bag. So that was enough to sort of put me on red alert, because I didn't have much fear, but I started having fear. The second incident happened 3 days later, where I got ambushed by 3 men with sharpened boulders above their head, and they all threw at my head about 1 meter or 2 meters away from my head. So it came through the glass, and I managed to go forward, and it went around me. I didn't get hurt. But the incident showed me a lot of things. It taught me so much. It taught me, one, that level of terror that you can go to. It taught me, two, that my nervous system will remember that level. It remembers. The body keeps the score, as Bessel van der Kolk always says. The body keeps the score. There's this sense of it holds on to that memory, and we've got to work with and process that memory. Because every year, at the same sort of time, as things turned round with the same sequence of pattern of weather or whatever it was, those triggers would set off great anxiety in me. So somebody had warned me, be careful of that. And I was warned, and I watched for it, and it came strong, and it was painful. So that's the one sort of obvious traumatic side. The other side was intergenerational, sitting there with a mother who was a refugee, little girl of 10 in France during the Second World War, overnight, pick up a suitcase and had to flee. Came to the ships that were picking up refugees and ended up on a ship down to Mozambique, and hence we're in the southern part of Africa. So this sudden amputation of her life. So what does she do with that? Well, refugees often can't manage too much because it feels too overwhelming, so they don't process and do all the work that some maybe we would do now with refugees. We'd work through something so we can integrate it a bit. So my mother kind of denied it slightly, or thought it was okay, thought it was a light-hearted, kept it quite light-hearted in her way of operating with it. So that sense of being a refugee passed to me. So as I grew up, I had a sense from a very stable environment that I was somehow not linking in. Was I from somewhere else? How did I fit? Feeling of being a refugee, almost tangibly. So I want to just mention this quickly because I do feel this is an important part. There was an actual sense of the intergenerational links to our epigenetics, which is quite controversial right now, knowing epigenetics. But what happens in epigenetics is that we get, our DNA gets passed down. So it's like, pretend our DNA is a book. Nothing changes with that book. It's exactly the same DNA. But on top of it gets attached a molecule, and this is the work of Professor Dan Siegel. On top of it is a molecule that gets attached. Everything about the system is trying to serve you. So if it happens again, you might have a sense of what to do. This molecule is almost like, how does this DNA get expressed? So if I was a book in a library and the molecule on top was the librarian, the book would be still the same, but how it gets expressed in the world is linked to that librarian. She can go and display it right in the front of the library. She can hide it in the archives. She can link it to, put it on a shelf. She can hide it somewhere. She could do what she wants with it. And that's how we get curtailed sometimes by our intergenerational systems. There was another study around mice where they horribly electrocuted their feet mildly and puffed in cherry blossom, the smell of cherry blossom at the same time. So these two associations were formed. The mice then, after a very short amount of time, would get the puff of smoke of cherry blossom and go into all the responses they'd had before, but they weren't getting electrocuted by their feet. If that mouse bred still in that trauma, its children and its grandchildren, and sometimes its grandchildren, great-grandchildren, could still have the effects of being affected by cherry blossom. Not one of them had ever been electrocuted. There's a sensitivity that's alerted in the system. Whereas if you take that same mouse that's been learned to associate pain and cherry blossom smell, and you deactivate that, you retrain it, you train it so that now cherry blossom is associated with food, then that mouse's genetics will not have that molecule. The next generation has no sensitivity to cherry blossom. So just bringing up the sense that we know these things intrinsically or intuitively or spiritually, we have a sense of them, sins of the fathers, but it's actually in some ways the traumas of the fathers. Let's think of the traumas of the mothers in some way. I'd like to reframe that around the traumas. So how does it affect us? What does it do when we're traumatized? Well, it hijacks you, basically. It hijacks your body, hijacks your neurology, it hijacks your physical and your emotional, your relational, and it often hijacks your spiritual too. We all react differently. So there's a sense of it's very individual. And often we become limited and we become inflexible. There's that rigidity that comes with trauma and a very much narrowed sense of consciousness. So it kind of curtails us that way. It affects our brain function and our ability to self-regulate. And I'm going to do a very brief description of what the happenings in our nervous system so that you know, as well as what happens in the brain, just so that you have a sense of, oh, is this happening to me? So you can recognize it in yourself. That feels important. Yeah. So as we start to understand the reactivity of our body, what our body's doing and what it's trying to do, it's in a survival response, we often realize that it's not our fault. It's not our fault that our body went numb when someone attacked us and we thought, we should have been fighting back. And people will say, why didn't you fight back? Well, it's biology. Biology takes you. It does it what it needs to do with you. It's trying to help you survive it. So that blaming, that shaming, that doubt, that loathing, that sense of flagellation of the self, that's what we want to really work with. We want to be gentle there. We want to bring in our compassion. We want to understand our responses so that we can work with them compassionately. And here I want to just bring in spiritual communities. Where is the trauma speaking in spiritual communities? Where is the trauma speaking? And where is it, we've seen it as sin or something that's quite harsh and blamey. Where is it that we can actually look with a more compassionate gaze? I really want to encourage that if I can. So we get locked into these states, what happens in our system. And I love the work around the nervous system because until I knew this, it's really opened up everything to know about the nervous system. So we get locked into a state of a nervous system. So when something happens, we are designed to go in, activate, fight, flight, freeze, whichever, deactivate, come out. And what we tend to do is we get locked into a system and then live in the system. We stay in that system, which can be highly, highly exhausting because your system is not meant to do that. It's meant to deactivate. So just noticing when you stay in a high regulated state or a numb state, just starting to notice what happens to you. So the work of Stephen Porges and the polyvagal theory, and somebody who studied with him called Deb Dana, she has done a course recently on befriending the nervous system, which is really very good. And it's all around navigating the system in the light of trauma. How do we see the world when we're in certain states, and how do we feel when we're in that state? So it's quite helpful to know if I'm feeling like this and then thinking, actually, am I in that state? Because it makes me feel like this is what the world looks like and this is how I feel. Then you can regulate your way out of that state when you have knowledge about it. So I'm going to just quickly go through them because I feel that's might be helpful. I hope so. The bottom most basic and least evolved state is our freeze response, the dorsal, the kind of just going into a locked state. That is, of course, everything is trying to serve you. Everything is your body and mind is trying to bring you to survival. So we take it that was one aspect of how to survive. It's just freeze, numb. But we notice it on the more subtle sides when it's a slight withdrawal that leads to a slight pullback, that leads to a slight sense of distance between, that leads to a further back. So there are different levels of numbing out. And you notice when you want to do that slight withdrawal and then it goes in, and sometimes you want to be isolated. So there's that freeze aspect to trauma. And here you feel a bit collapsed, as if things are disappearing, as if you don't have you're not connected to something. And the feeling is there's almost like a glass wall between you and the world. And the sense that you have of yourself is often really, it's almost like you're abandoned or you're lost or you're isolated or disconnected. Strong sense of disconnection. That's freeze. So the world always looks like it's unwelcoming in that state, and yet you're not fully part of it. So that's important to know. So just notice for a moment, when do you feel like you're in the freeze state? Yeah. Then we want to go into the next level of the hierarchy, is the sympathetic or the flight fight. When the flight fight comes in, that's a full charge into your body. So there's a chaotic aspect to it. There's a sense of too much energy in the body. And often when we go into this state in modern life, we're not doing it because we actually do have something that we need to run or fight. Often it is a matter of we've just agitated at work or put into a position in a meeting. So we actually have got all this charge in our body with nowhere to put it, that sense. Yeah. So just notice when you've got that. So here you feel disorganized and chaotic. There's a chaos to it. The world looks like it's quite unmanageable, and it can be really terrifying. You can feel out of control, dysregulated, and potentially in danger. Yeah. And then we've got the wonderful newest state, which is the top section, which is our ventral vagal state. Safe, connected, feeling like you're part of the world. The world looks like it's welcoming. You feel part of it. You connect well to yourself. You'll connect well to others. It's not perfect, but there's a sense of possibility. There's a sense of being alive and well. There's an aliveness and you're well. So that feeling. And we go into that state. Hopefully we want to live more from that state. So Nick, I wonder whether you could just show that one slide of the window of tolerance. This gives a nice overview of moving in and out of the state. So the ventral vagal will be that middle window of tolerance, where you're actually in the place of just calm, connected, good relationships, not perfect, but able to stay in an equilibrium, not too tired, just in a nice place of calmness there. And then when you start to get aroused towards fight flight, you get into hyperarousal. So you start to move out of it and move upwards, and you can see it starts to, first of all, feel uncomfortable, revved up, a little bit anxious, agitated. And then if it goes past that, it goes into the red alert area, which is extremely anxious, rageful, out of control, and you're in a completely different state up there. So that's your volcanic. So you notice if you tend to go that way when you're very triggered, or whether you go down the other way, which is to the bottom, where you've got a sense of, first of all, feeling like you're slightly withdrawing, then you're shutting down a bit, then you're a little bit spacey, then you're losing track of time, sluggish, and before you know it, you're down in the iced part, you're frozen, and this is extremely zoned out and numb. So we want to just notice where you are on that. Just take a moment to look. Okay, thanks, babe. You can go back. Thank you. So I'm going to get through the science part and then we can get to the treatment, because that feels like really the part we want to gallop towards. So the Prof. Dan Siegel that I spoke about, the Prof of Psychiatry, talks about the same systems in the brain. So you've got that regulation of those three things in the nervous system and the same in the brain. And he did this beautiful, simple way of showing it. You've got your brain stem, fight, flight, freeze, very strong survival instinct. You've got your limbic system in the brain, memories and emotions. This is your life pattern that has been laid down there. That's what happened to you and all the associated feelings. And then we've got this beautiful prefrontal cortex, the most evolved part of our brain here, which only really forms in 23, 24, so it's quite late. This part of the brain is regulation, planning, an ability to see, clear-sightedness, its ability to plan and to be rational, to be empathetic. And the key to this part, when you're operating a lot from this part, you're able to hold large emotions really calmly. So if you think about the monks and the Dalai Lama and the leaders, how they large emotion really calmly and with a kind of equanimity. We're wanting that, the equanimity that comes. So how do we train ourselves to stay here? And this is all around the contemplative prayer, the meditation, it's the mindfulness. Those things in mindfulness, the whole of the prefrontal cortex starts to expand. Even in 8 weeks, it'll start to grow, and your reactivity part will start to shrink. And you can actually just see the brain shift like that. So completely, plasticity of your brain changes very quickly, actually. If you do it regularly, just get your bum on the seat, as they say. So using these ideas of how this works, and I just thought at this point maybe we could pause and just have a short moment of settling and going to notice what's there for you in terms of the mindfulness, so we can just settle our bodies. And I just want you to tune in as best you can. So if you'd like to close your eyes, or if you don't want to close your eyes, just have a soft gaze or gently look somewhere and just take a deep breath in and sigh it out. Nowhere to go, nothing to do, just being where you are right now. And just allowing yourself to come to an unhurried place. No rushing, no pushing, no striving. First allowing yourself to notice your feet on the floor and your seat on the chair. And just the sense of how gravity is holding you. There's a weightedness to you. And that weightedness and that grounding, that rooting, really helps you come back into the body. So just noticing yourself in that. And we want to bring in the attitude of kindness, a kind eye, looking at yourself with compassion and kindness. And that's very helpful in the movement of any work that's difficult. And then I want you to notice just the way you're sitting, so where your sitting bones are on the chair or on the bed or wherever you are, just having a sense of your back coming out of the pelvic girdle all the way up to the crown of your head, vertebra upon vertebra stacked up. And this counter to gravity, this pull against gravity, just having a sense of the holding capacity of your back to keep you in that position. So a real sense of muscles holding your back up and the strength at your back. So we're grounded and rooted with your feet and your seat, and then coming out of your back, this sense of this back holding you upright in an erect position. And then holding your head high, chest open but relaxed, and just having a sense of taking your seat at the center of yourself. Just a sense of arriving at something central, your true nature, just imagining and sensing that true nature at the core of you. And coming round to the front part where your soft organs are, and just a sense of the soft front, the soft, compassionate front. For a moment noticing where you might feel tension, tightness, and then just noticing where you might feel softness and relaxation. And perhaps both things at the same time, in different parts of you. So grounded and rooted, anchored to the earth, held by gravity, counter to gravity, sitting erect and upright in your true nature, taking your seat, strength at your back, muscles holding, soft, compassionate front. Taking a deep breath in, and just letting a very slow exhale. One more time, and a slow exhale. Nice. And when you're ready, gently opening your eyes. Okay, so the second part I want to chat about is the treatment. How do we work with trauma so that it can be resolved in some form, moved forward in some form? And immediately I think of it like weaving a basket. It's like there's a whole lot of strands that have got to be in place in order to hold you in a particular way. And those strands have got to almost be found out by you, because some of them will suit you, some of them won't, and you've got to find what really is right for you. So that sense of holding capacity of this basket that holds you, this triangle of awareness, what you're thinking, what you're observing, what is in your body, and what is in your emotions. First of all, we start with the top down. So with trauma, we're always looking at what's needing processing, what's needing to be worked with. And again, compassionately, we want to say, what therapist, maybe a therapist in a safe space, something that allows the processing. Sometimes the cognitive therapy works for somebody, cognitive behavioral, or we've got things like that rapid eye movement, which helps to integrate the brain, the EMDR. There are lots and lots and lots of modalities out there. So finding the one that will help you move from the brain to affect the body. But as we know with trauma, you have to work with the body too, up into the brain. So you're wanting both ways, brain to body, body to brain. So the brain coming downwards, we can look at things like, well, mindfulness in some sense. Mindfulness does both. But the Jungian work, symbolic work can be very helpful. So I often do a thing where I will work with flowers and stones if I'm working with, say, grief and loss. Say if somebody's coming with some lot of things, or they're working through a relationship or divorce, I will work with what is symbolic of things that hold you heavy, hold you down, and we'll put those into the water in a bowl. And then what are the things that are needed, or part of your true nature, or that have come through, that have been some form of learning. And then we put those as flowers, and we form these flower bowls, which can be used as prayerful bowls, they can be used as therapeutic bowls, they can be used for lots of bowls. And before we started today, in the early part of the day, it's spring here, for beautiful spring flowers, and I've done a special bowl for you, which I'm going to just quickly show you. So there's your flower bowl, each one representing a thought, an intention, a hope, a prayer for each of you in whatever you're holding, and everything that you can be too. So then let's think of the bottom up. So the bottom up would be around things like TRE, tension release exercises. It can be the breathing work. It can be any form of body work. It can be journaling, where you're trying to put feelings from the left brain and integrate with what sensations and feelings come up on the right. It can be singing, dancing, art. It can be journaling. It can be a million things there. Singing and dancing and art are really important in externalizing something, in ensuring that, because grief work is always around externalizing, and a lot of trauma work can be around grief. So we've got that sense of, how do I externalize my grief? How do I do that? There are lots of ways of doing that. The singing, the dancing, the ritualizing, the symbolic work, the going for a walk every day and picking up a stone if you're grieving a person, and you're putting it down till you form a little cairn. So the sense of forming a cairn. So there's something that you can see, lighting the candle, doing something symbolic that'll externalize it and place it outside of you in some form, helps in the integration and the movement of it. So Bessel van der Kolk, who's a famous psychologist who did the Body Keeps the Score, wonderful book, he said that he had quite a difficult childhood, and he played the trumpet. And he thinks that because one of the ways that we calm our nervous system is to do these long exhales. And because we're doing these long exhales, trumpeting is one long exhale. So he said he actually thinks he survived his childhood through playing the trumpet and doing endless long exhales. So that is that's very worthy of noting. One, as I come towards the end, I just wanted to say, he said, and this is one of the things I wanted to mention, is trauma is a public health issue. It's trauma treatments, neuroscience, politics, all are intertwined, and that poverty, inferior education, and housing form trauma loops, form intergenerational trauma, form trauma issues, and that we have to look at how to renovate the whole system. We've also got to teach our education system, our legal system, our medical system, we've got to be teaching our churches, our mosques, our shuls, all religious and spiritual practices. We've got to be informing everybody what trauma looks like and how to come to it and how to help people rather than exacerbate it. There's not enough information to work with that. So we all link together and help each other in that way. So it comes down to, we all belong and we all have a place. And we've got to work with how to help us all belong and all have a place. So that more or less concludes what I was about to do. And I wanted to say something which really, in my mind, I did a mindfulness training at the university here. We had a wonderful teacher right at the end who came from America, Bob Stahl, and he said, basically, right at the end of our training, of our silent retreat, he said, you never know what happens in another person where the spirit meets the bone. And so where I might have unintentionally triggered you, hurt you, in some way offended you, I ask your forgiveness, he said. And I've been wanting to do that ever since then, so I'm doing it on you. Yeah, the sense of, if anything in this triggers, brings up, that is not my intention, and I ask for forgiveness for that. But I love that idea. We don't know what happens to another where the spirit meets the bone. So our invitation ultimately is to firstly honor your own unique nature. Really honor it. Holding it as best you can with respect and with kindness. And then when you're ready to start the work or to continue to do the work to heal yourself and your line, body, mind, emotional life, spirit, without any pressure or any sense of self-doubt or self-flagellation, just gently coming to it when you can, in the ways that you can. And as you start to heal, to live a full and resourceful life, and in your true nature, you will affect your family, and your family will then affect their community, and the community will then affect your town, and your town will affect the city and your country, and so it goes on, and the water flows, the water begins to flow, the life-giving water. So it starts with just one person, it starts with me, and it starts with you. Thank you. So I'm just going to take one or two questions if there are any. So if you want to ask anything, if there's any feedback, and if there isn't, that's also fine.
I will just simply say how extraordinary this is and wonderful, and I thank you so much. I think I speak for a number of the people in the room. This is just very important stuff, and you know, more it's just wonderful to hear from you, and to hear everything that you presented is just wonderful. So thank you.
Thanks
so much for that offering. And you've just shared so many wonderful things. I was like ferociously taking notes. And a lot of it rings true, you know, in my and from what I've learned, which is very little compared to you. You've been really immersed in this for so long. So it's wonderful that you've imparted this to us now.
Thank you.
When there's so many things I could say and I don't even know where to begin, but I'm curious about if you've heard much about, I'm sure you have, this a lot of this seems to reflect just the compassion to the self, and the compassion to the true nature, and the compassion to the parts of yourself that you want to reconnect or reintegrate, the members of yourself, you know, is very much like the internal family systems, which is a type of therapy. For all of those who don't know, this is, you know, it's all about being compassionate to the parts of yourselves that are, you know, have been exiled essentially, but based on trauma and other things in your life, and then the protectors that also emerge to protect those exiles. And anyway, that's the type of, actually I'm in that therapy now, so it's really wonderful to hear it kind of laid out in a new way, to see how it could be integrated into all that we do all around us, individually, collectively, you know. So I guess I don't have a question around any of this, but just simply to share my gratitude to you to present all of this. And I open the floor to anybody else who would like to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I just wanted to say that's so beautiful, because that one, you know, internal family systems can be a profound one, and we've got a specialist right here in our audience. But there's a sense of, you know, it can be done also with other things. I think that the more we do over our lifetime, the better. And it's different things at different times. And I keep on thinking, I want to train till the rest of my life. I want to learn. I want to keep evolving. I want to die with like a course propped on my stomach kind of thing that I'm in the middle of. You know, there's a sense of I don't want to stop the learning. And I think that's actually, so it's beautiful that one keeps moving, and that'd be right for a certain time, and then maybe something else. Yeah. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Could I ask a question, Anne?
Sure. Hi, Gail.
Hi. You mentioned the venal vagal state, and
ventral vagal, yeah.
Ventral vagal. I've heard just a very little bit about the vagal nerve, but I'm just wondering if you can enlighten us a little bit more what kind of a state that is, and why it's called that.
So the ventral vagus is a wandering, it's the Latin word for wandering nerve, and it's the 10th cranial nerve coming out the back of the head, and it basically goes down through the system. And what's so beautiful about it, and which we only really found out in the 90s, is that it goes through all the face. So the facial, it's picking up all the cues and elements of the face. So micro movements, micro bracings, inflections, it's picking all of that up, which is why we get that strong sense from someone else. Then it goes down, it goes round through the throat, round the heart, so it has a real sense of encasing the heart, picking up reactions to heartbeat, etc., round the stomach and the respiratory and the lungs. So it's really encasing all our systems in a way, and that's why we have that gut reaction that sends a brain response. We've got the vagal nerve connecting it, and then it sort of sprays out through the body. So it's an extraordinary nerve. It's one of our most important nerves. It's a nerve we only just realized we had fairly recently, and it connects all these wonderful systems together, which gives us this astute, intuitive ability to read things. But in trauma, you often get disconnected from something. So you always want you to come back into that state, because in the ventral safe state, you can read things right. That's what I think one of the key things is. You often misread things when you're in those other states, because you're coming from a different system. Your brain's operating from different places.
Okay, thank you. That's a good explanation. Thanks.
Pleasure.
Can I ask a question?
Sure. Hi.
So I'm familiar with sort of inner child work and stuff like that, which I guess is a bit like what Hope said. I don't know, but I also know people who dissociate, and I just wondered if that's the similar kind of thing, and whether that is about, because they seem almost quite settled in, they have these different parts, but whether the goal is to sort of bring them to integrate them, or whether they stay separate, or how that works.
Yeah. So thanks for that question, because I think dissociate will link to that freeze response. It also relates to splitting off, where something is so overwhelming that you can't integrate it, so it becomes separate from yourself, and you're working with how to reconnect it. And it's always around reconnection. So the safer you place that, as you start feeling safe, that's why with a therapist or a person that feels wise, if you're feeling safe and connected, you start to be able to go into those deeper places where you actually can find those bits of yourself which are dissociated because they're too painful, and you can slowly bring them back. But the point I wanted to make is that the work has to be titrated. It has to be, you don't want a deluge of stuff coming back. You're wanting just what you can manage. So that's why the work's kind of like fine work, because you want to just pull in enough. You don't want that person overwhelmed. You want to pull it in, integrate it, pull it in, integrate it, like that. Especially for that big work, the dissociated, the split off parts that are too hard. Yeah, thank you. That's why also the compassionate gaze helps so much, because it feels like it's sort of got warm arms around the whole process, which is what you're wanting. And even though you don't want it to sound like it's namby-pamby, it's not. It's actually essential to the work, in my view. You can't do this with the kind of clinical stuff. You need that humanity in it, right at the core of it. Yeah. Thank you.
And Lorian here.
Hello.
Hi. Just wondering how we can access the recording of this. Is it possible
I think Nick's done a recording, so I'm sure we could work something out there.
Okay, great. And then just wanted to ask you as well about teenagers, and whether you see teenagers, and whether you think that what you've been talking about is too complicated for them to grasp, or do you explain this whole thing to teenagers as well?
Well, I mean, every teenager I've ever mentioned this to, and I don't specialize in teenagers, but if any teenagers, I've got my own teenagers, so it's not my area of choice. But I think the thing is that every time that I mention it to someone and I explain it to them, they're almost very relieved to know the science of it, the nervous system, what's happening in their bodies. It's very helpful. The information's helpful to navigate something. So I do find that they understand it, and that I think they work well with it. They usually work well with it, but it's not. It's got to be appropriate. Yeah, the whole thing's got to be an appropriate setting, appropriate way.
Okay.
There's a question here. What is my opinion of? Have you finished? Sorry, Lorian.
Yes. No, that's fine. Thanks, Anne.
Okay. Orca, I'm just reading your opinion of DBT therapy. Yeah, I think it's very good. I think it's one of the strands. I definitely would use that in certain places, and I think that it's very helpful. So, yeah, I think that woman, I can't remember her name now, whoever developed it, but I think she's, one up there with some of the top people. It's a really important, helpful way forward. Yeah. And you clearly bring the feminine and spiritual together in your practice. Have you perceived any gender differences as how men and women approach trauma work? That's interesting. Yeah, I have. I tend to work more with women. I do work with men, but I tend to have had more women come to me. And I do think. I don't think there's that much difference. I think I don't like to sort of go down the gender. It's individuals, and some of the men that I've met have just literally. It's almost like the work is like to a thirsty man. They will grab it, drink it, and be quenched within seconds. In fact, some of the people that have worked the best with me have been some of the men who've done that, who've been like porous for the work, ready for it, and then the others who bob like a cork. they won't deepen, and that's quite complicated. As one of the few men in this room, Andre, I say thanks, Anne, and all females who are pushing this kind of work of healing. Many of our males in South Africa seem trapped in trauma. We need this. Yeah, thanks, Andre. Yeah, I agree. I think our work in South Africa is enormous, but I think it's worldwide, actually. Anything else that came up? So what I would like to do is, as we close, is I just want to finish with a poem, one of my favorite poems. And it's the I Will Not Die an Unlived Life. So just to finish off, and I'm just remembering that we've got our candles for your true nature, for your suffering. And we've got this beautiful flower bowl next to me for all the things that we think of for you, and it was around for you, for this group, whoever came. I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear of falling or catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days, to allow my living to open me, to make me less afraid, more accessible, to loosen my heart until it becomes a wing, a torch, a promise. I choose to risk my significance, to live so that which came to me as seed goes to the next as blossom, and that which came to me as blossom goes on as fruit. I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear of falling or catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days, to allow my living to open me, to make me less afraid, more accessible, to loosen my heart until it becomes a wing, a torch, a promise. I choose to risk my significance, to live so that which came to me as seed goes to the next as blossom, and that which came to me as blossom goes on as fruit. Thank you all. It was lovely having you with me.
Thank you, Anne. That was really beautiful, clear and
Thanks.
intelligent.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Just thank you so much, Anne. And I'm just noticing a couple other comments. There's a question on if you would want to run a program on healing and awakening mindfulness at some point.
Yeah. Who asked that? That's really nice.
Zabada looks like.
Yes. Hi, Zabada. Yes. Love to do that. Thank you. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. I'm gonna cut the thing now.
Wonderful. Well, happy burn to everybody, any of the burners that are with us now.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us. This is part of the SpiritSpace camp in the Burning Man space. So you're welcome to join us for any of the other offerings this week. We'd love for you to check us out. I'll just drop our little direct address in here to where things are. So if any of the burners are still with us, but we would love to be a part of this and continue the conversation with whoever would like to be a part of that. And thank you so much for chiming in from South Africa. And
yeah, such a pleasure.
Thank you.
It's really lovely. Thank you. Go
Baie
well.
dankie.
Bye. Bye, donkey. Bye.